Welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. A radical breakthrough in the treatment of Alzheimer's. Well, maybe not. The FDA has approved a new drug to fight the disease, but at what cost? The drug is astronomically expensive. Even worse, there's no proof that it works. Medical reporter Lori Johnson explains why.
Biogen's new Alzheimer's drug, Aduhelm, is a monthly intravenous infusion with an annual cost of $56,000 before insurance. Still, questions linger about its effectiveness. One study showed no effectiveness at all. The other showed a slight reduction in the rate of decline. While this limited evidence prompted an independent advisory committee to discourage approval, the FDA still gave the okay.
What's important about this is that there was, of course, some controversy and very complicated sets of data that many people had different opinions about. But importantly, the FDA actually approved this today under accelerated approval.
Alzheimer's expert Dr. David Perlmutter is concerned about significant brain bleeding and swelling detected in trial participants, and the fact that Aduhelm is for people with mild symptoms.
It's actually designed to be used in people who have what's called MCI, or mild cognitive impairment, which, to be fair, is a harbinger for future Alzheimer's, but this should not be construed as a treatment for Alzheimer's disease.
The drug claims to remove amyloid plaque in the brain, but Alzheimer's researcher Dr. Dale Bredesen says that substance is simply a barrier protecting the brain from attacks.
The big problem here is that people have equated amyloid with Alzheimer's. These are two quite different things. The amyloid is a response to the what's inducing the Alzheimer's, whereas Alzheimer's is the disease. And just getting rid of amyloid, that's not getting rid of Alzheimer's.
Bredesen says the best way to reverse the disease is by identifying and treating things attacking the brain, like metabolism, pathogens, and toxins.
Medical reporter Lori Johnson is here. Lori, why do you think it's such a mystery? I mean, Alzheimer's is a horrible disease. Why don't you think the FDA can understand what Bredesen and his associates are saying?
Well, it's a great question, and it all boils down to the desire for a drug, one drug, that people can take a pill or get an IV infusion that addresses this very complex disease. What Dr. Bredesen discovered is that there are many different causes for Alzheimer's, many different things that contribute to it, dozens of them, and he has developed this test people can take to see which one of these they have and then address these different things through a protocol or lifestyle changes. So it's a complicated disease. There's not just one thing causing Alzheimer's.
He tried to get approval of his techniques, and they wouldn't give it to him. They said, you've got to give us a pill. If you can't get a pill, we're not going to approve it. But the FDA gave accelerated approval on this other one. Now, what does accelerated mean?
Accelerated approval is for diseases a lot of people are suffering from, for which there's really no treatment or cure. And so the idea is, even if there's the tiniest whisper of hope, put it on the market, let people start taking it right away and continue to test it. The problem, Pat, is that when people say an Alzheimer's drug works, a lot of times what they're saying is it works to remove amyloid plaque. But listen, hear me. Just because you remove amyloid plaque does not mean your memory comes back. And so the best case scenario for removing amyloid plaque is that for a very short period of time, in a very few people, the progression of the disease slows down, but it doesn't stop the progression of the disease, and it certainly doesn't reverse the symptoms. But with the Bredesen protocol, we are seeing that. The complete halt of symptoms, and in many cases, the reversal of the Alzheimer's symptoms. If people want to know more about the Bredesen protocol, go to our website, cbnnews.com. There's lots of information. We've had Dr. Bredesen on the program many times, as you know.
last question. He says essentially Alzheimer's is the same inflammation that causes so many of these other diseases. Is that what it is? It's inflammation.
Absolutely. Inflammation in the brain. And there are a lot of different things that cause inflammation, Pat. He identified dozens of them. Some of them have to do with diet. Some of them have to do with infections, like bacterial infections like Lyme disease, or viral infections like herpes. Other things can cause this inflammation, toxins that we're exposed to in our environment. And some people are at greater risk if they have this APOE4 gene. Some people have one. That raises your risk of Alzheimer's about 33%. If you have two of these genes, then you have about a 75% chance of developing Alzheimer's. So there are ways to sort of silence these genes to kind of make them not express themselves in people. So this is why some people have Alzheimer's and others. They often have the genes, but you can, as I say, kind of turn off those genes with the Bredesen protocol. It's very fascinating, very exciting, but it does require a lot of work on the part of the patient. And a lot of people don't like that. They'd rather take a pill. But remember, this was the same situation with type 2 diabetes. When doctors figured out what causes it, eating too much sugar, that's how they used to treat patients. They told them to stop eating sugar, and it worked until they developed insulin. And it might be the same type of thing with Alzheimer's. We can treat the symptoms now if we can stop doing what is causing Alzheimer's.
Lori, thank you for that, Jim. Folks, I want to tell you, I've just finished a book about Ronald Reagan, and, you know, he slipped into a later decline, but two things happened to him. Number one, he got shot, and he got shot badly, and he was near death, lost almost all of his blood. There was a double shock. The second thing is, later on, he was out riding an untried horse down in Mexico, and the horse got spooked and began to buck. And he didn't just buck, but he bucked frantically, so much so that Reagan was thrown off the horse and hit his head. They didn't think there was anything wrong, and then later they found a hematoma at the Mayo Clinic, and he had to have that operated on. So those two things, the next thing you know, he's got Alzheimer's. But people have just ignored that, especially that fall where he hit his head. I was sure that was what did it. But the two shocks to his system triggered that terrible decline that he had, this great man, when he wrote, he knew he was going into the area that he'd never return. But we don't know yet, but thank goodness for Bredesen and these other doctors who are saying, look, there is a way to get around this thing, but you don't do it with one pill. Well, in other news, the fake media did it. They shot down the theory that the coronavirus came from a lab in Wuhan. But guess what? A secret report and a former Secretary of State are now giving that theory credence for calling for more investigation. Ephraim Graham has that.
Pat, the possibility of a lab leak as the source of the coronavirus pandemic was gaining traction long before the media got on board. The Wall Street Journal reports a government lab found that the theory was plausible and worthy of investigation as early as May of 2020. The Journal citing a secret report by the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in California, which reportedly presented compelling reasons to follow up on the theory the virus escaped from a lab in Wuhan, China. Former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice recently stating the theory was ignored despite the warning signs.
There was too much of a tendency early on to dismiss this possibility of a laboratory leak. Some of the evidence was right in front of our faces. We know that there were State Department diplomats who inspected, so to speak, that laboratory and came back and said that the safety practices were substandard.
3 Wuhan lab researchers fell ill with COVID-like symptoms in November of 2019. Pat, back to you.
I know if you're like I am, you're sick of hearing about the Institute of Virology and gain of function research and all this stuff. But the truth is the media just didn't want to give Donald Trump a break. And when he began to bring forth this, they just poo-pooed it. But they covered it up. And that's the big story. They covered up what was clear to people like Condoleezza Rice and others who had gone and investigated. It was clear that it was a man-made manipulation of a virus, and it came out of that Institute of Virology in Wuhan. And if you're with me, I'm sick of hearing about it, but nevertheless, what we got to ask the media is, will you start acting like reporters and stop acting like partisans against President Trump? Ephraim?
Pat, Vice President Kamala Harris working to stem the flood of migrants at the southern U.S. border during her trip to Latin America Monday, delivering a strong message in Guatemala.
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come. The United States will continue to enforce our laws and secure our border.
That message is unpopular with some Democrats. New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez calling it disappointing. The number of detentions at the border hit a 21-year monthly high in April. Harris arrived in Mexico last night for the second half of her two-day trip to the region. A surprise win in a mayoral race in South Texas has some Democrats fearing they're losing their grip on the Hispanic vote. Voters elected Republican candidate Javier Villalobos was in McAllen, a town with Hispanic majority and a bastion for Democrats. His message on improving the economy apparently connecting with residents, about 25% of whom live in poverty. Texas Governor Greg Abbott says the victory shows Hispanic voters are receptive to populist Republican messages. Pat?
If you remember your history, there was a president named Lyndon Baines Johnson, and he got to be senator by an amazing election. And there was a judge down in McAllen, Texas, who was in charge of keeping the ballots. And LBJ would be counting, and he said, I'm 100 votes down. And the next thing you know, from miraculously out of McAllen in that particular district came 100 more ballots. And then they would count some more, and he would be down 50, and he would say, well, I'm down 50, and suddenly they would discover 50 more votes. It was the most crooked thing you ever saw. But to see that particular county, it was Farr County, I believe was the name of it, to see that now turning Republican is in itself a great victory for the Republicans in the state of Texas. Ephraim?
Pat, a cybersecurity breakthrough. The Justice Department seizing millions of dollars in ransom paid to a Russia-based cyber gang and warning other cyber criminals this is just the beginning. CBN's Jenna Browder brings us the story from Washington.
The Justice Department was able to recover $2.3 million in ransom paid by Colonial Pipeline to Russia-based DarkSide, about half the full amount. Still, though, the federal government is warning businesses to be on high alert and to take extra precaution.
Today, we turned the tables on DarkSide.
A new task force scoring a big win against ransomware hackers.
We deprived a cyber criminal enterprise of the object of their activity, their financial proceeds and funding.
The hack shut down pipeline operations for 6 days, leading to panic buying and gas shortages up and down the East Coast. Colonial ultimately paid $4.3 million. The Justice Department recovering the equivalent of $2.3 million in Bitcoin. The FBI using the criminal gang's private key to access their cryptocurrency wallet.
This is a first, as far as I know. How they did it.
These attacks becoming more and more common. The nation's largest meat supplier, JBS, targeted just last week. And the SolarWinds attack on U.S. government entities, highlighting vulnerabilities and Russia's involvement. The Biden administration is warning businesses to act now to protect themselves.
Pay attention now. Invest resources now. Failure to do so could be the difference between being secure now or a victim later.
The Biden administration is also making plans for a response to the Russian government for harboring these cyber criminals. President Biden is expected to meet with Vladimir Putin next week in Geneva. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
And the government once again did recover half of what they paid. Pat, back to you.
In a couple of days, we're going to bring you what should be done to the infrastructure of America to harden our grid against not just cyber attacks, but solar flares and electrical impulses that could come about. If our grid goes down, we're in serious trouble. So we're going to tell you on this program precisely what needs to be done and how much it'll cost. At least I hope we can get those figures for you.